Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Paul, and in this Rig Limited video, we're going to be discussing AMD's Navi GPU architecture and Sony's PlayStation 5. A lot of details have emerged from supposed leaks and industry sources over the past day, so we're going to be delving into them and trying to ascertain exactly what this could mean for both companies. So just to give you some insight and a brief synopsis of what we're going to be discussing, it is apparent, according to these leaks, that the PlayStation 5 is not only using the Navi GPU, but perhaps more importantly, AMD were tasked by Sony, which, by the way, them doing this took around 2/3 of the engineers at RTG, Radio and Technology Group, to create Navi specifically for the PlayStation 5. We also have details that the PlayStation 5 is actually not only using Navi, but is using Zen, or more specifically, the Zen Plus CPUs. So we're going to be going through those details as well as a roadmap for Navi and the next generation GPUs from AMD. Now, before I go any further, I want to stress that this is supposed leaks from insiders. Whether this is true or not, I don't know. So currently, there are a couple of websites which are reporting this, including Forbes, so I am somewhat believing that there is some truth to this, but you can make your own minds up as normal, and we can just start from the beginning. I'm going to read out some notes concerning Navi and Vega. I'm going to plop links to the articles I'm getting this information from, of course, in the video description, so you can go ahead and check that out after you've watched this video, and I do want to know your opinions of this in the comments below, because we are going to be tackling, as I said, the PlayStation 5's possible performance level, plus a lot of other details as well. So, first of all, Vega 7nm is not going to be coming to gamers. You may recall that AMD's Computex show, Lisa Su, did say that there would be a 7nm GPU, but she stopped short of saying whether it was going to be Vega or Navi. At the time, I did assume it was going to be Vega after all. She had just, and her company, just spoken at length about the benefits of Vega and Vega 7nm. So it's not unreasonable to assume that, well, there's going to be an RX Vega 7nm. Perhaps it was just going to be a bit later, but no, that's not going to be the case. Apparently, we're going to be getting Navi, specifically Navi 10. Now, the performance levels for Navi 10 are supposedly around the levels of RX Vega, but it's going to be made on a smaller process, and it's going to be obviously a cheaper component. It, according to these leaks, is going to be hitting around the second half of 2019, possibly a little earlier. But after that, we're going to see Navi 14, and then later on, Navi 20. Navi 20 is going to be considerably more powerful, but it may not hit until 2020 or even 2021. Now, this is where things get a little juicy. Navi will be the first architecture to transition away from GCN. Now, that, of course, has been AMD's staple for some time, and also moved AMD away from the very long instruction word, VLIW4, beforehand they had VLIW5, to the SIMD architecture that we currently have. I don't want to plug my own stuff. Yes, I do. But there's also a video which I'm going to try to remember that to link in the video description, which is an analysis of a couple of patents that AMD filed concerning a new GPU architecture. To give you a very brief overview of what that is, because I don't want to tread over old ground for people who have seen that, essentially it's a super SIMD architecture. What that basically means is the best things about SIMD, or GCN, just to simplify this, is that it's really good for compute-orientated tasks. Not so good, however, for gaming. It's not as optimized. So really it comes down to the compiler. The benefit of Super SIMD, or the next generation of architecture from AMD, at least according to what we're hearing, is that it's going to be a lot better at, well, both. It's going to essentially bring the best of both worlds. There is a lot of ambiguity, though, whether that is Navi or not. And lastly, the next generation architecture that we keep hearing about. Remember, we've got Vega 7nm. So Vega's currently released. Vega 7nm is essentially about to be released, but that apparently is only going to be for the HPC, high performance computing and AI and that type of segment. Then, of course, we keep hearing about Navi, and then after that, we keep hearing about next generation. There is no information other than it just says next generation. We know it's going to be scalable, What does scalable mean? I don't know. No one knows. And they've said next generation memory as well. We can presume next generation memory is going to be like HBM3 or GDDR6. But other than that, we just don't know. Anyway, apparently this next generation architecture is the UARC, which is formerly codenamed Kuma. That's K-U-M-A, much like the Tekken character, incidentally. And then AMD didn't like that name. And then they've essentially said it's going to be a brand new architecture that's going to roll out with Navi. Now, how that works or not, no one exactly says. No one exactly knows. So where does AMD and Sony come into this? Well, the PlayStation 5, as we know, has been in development. There have been numerous leaks concerning the PlayStation 5. Supposedly, some developers do have development kits, although we haven't seen any exact leaks about the specifications, so we don't know, for example, it has X number of teraflops, this amount of RAM, this amount of CPU performance. What we do know about the leaks, however, is it will be Navi based, it will be Zen based, and most likely we can pretty much ascertain it's going to be GDDR6 based. Now, let me tell you the source of that information. Navi, there's multiple sources. Most recently, this Forbes article, but there have been also other ones which, you know, there are so many pieces of information, including the fact from Semi-Accurate, it's pretty established now it will be Navi based, and honestly, it just makes a lot of sense. We'll go more into the Navi side in just a moment, I promise. Then it's going to be Zen based. Do remember on GitHub there was that code repository from the Sony engineer. I can't remember the chap's name, I apologize, but it doesn't really matter. He was working on a optimization for the Zen architecture. So he was a PlayStation engineer. It just makes sense. And that was for the PlayStation compiler. And it's a PlayStation toolchain. He wasn't just doing this in his spare time. It was specifically for this reason. So this dude was doing it for his job. He was not doing this because he was testing out a completely different project, or, you know, he was doing it as a hobby. He was definitely doing it on behalf of Sony because he was using Sony specific toolchains and languages and all the other bits and pieces. I have covered that in depth before. You can check it out, or you can just take my word for it on this article, or you can do some, on this video, or you can do some Googling yourself. So what we do know is those are pretty much a given. However, the latest information, because it was ambiguous whether it was Zen or Zen Plus. For those who don't know, if you're more console orientated, I'm going to give you a very brief crash course. Zen was the processor that launched on like the Ryzen 1000 series. So that was last year, that launched last April. For example, the Ryzen 1700, the 1600 and so on. The Zen cores, of course, comprised the Ryzen processors. So you would have 4 cores in one CCX module, and then you would have different configurations of that. So for example, the Ryzen 7 1700 would have 2 CCX modules, which of course was 8 cores, and it supported SMT, simultaneous multi-threading. I know I'm going over some old ground here for regular viewers, but I just want to make sure everyone's on the same page if you're more console orientated in technology. So Zen Plus is an updated version of that. Zen was on a 14nm process. This is on a 12nm plus. There are obviously a few benefits there. Lower power consumption, higher clock speeds, and also AMD have tweaked some stuff on the silicon. We're conducting some tests on that, and we've also got some reviews already up. And there's going to be a few others actually testing IPC performance over the next couple of days that I'm actually working on right now between the two architectures. But one of the things they did was improve the memory control and the faster memory speed support. That would be main system memory, and also reduce cache latency and just other bits and pieces, basically increasing the bandwidth across the chip. So what's important to you is that Sony are using the updated Zen architecture. Great. However, it is not Zen 2. So Zen 2 is built on 7nm. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is because there are numerous changes, we don't know all of them, for Zen 2. One of them we can presume is going to be higher clock speed, lower power consumption, plus of course other silicon changes, but from the latest reports that Forbes and other websites have gotten, it is not Zen 2, it is Zen Plus. But it is built on a 7nm process. So AMD and Sony have collaborated, and they've basically gone like this best of both worlds. Well, I guess halfway house is a better way to describe it. Okay, so they are using Navi for the PlayStation 5. Okay, I'm actually remembering all this of this on top of my head, so I'm trying to make sure I haven't forgotten anything, but I'm pretty sure I'm good so far. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, the PlayStation 5, we're not sure if it's going to be using a SoC/APU. So the PlayStation 4, the Xbox One, they of course use SoCs. The Xbox One X also used the Scorpion engine. So that is basically a CPU, a GPU, and any other components like audio components, or for example the Xbox One, the original, and the S used of course the ESRAM, and it was all bundled onto the same die. This does not appear to be the case necessarily for the PlayStation 5. It could be two separate chips, or it could be one chip. We're not sure yet. Sony are apparently working on that, and we're not quite sure where the chips are gonna fall. Anyway, yeah. So the benefit of it being one is that it reduces cost, possibly lower power consumption, but it could potentially increase the cost in terms of the, it could potentially lower the yields, and it could also be quite difficult to cool it as well. Obviously, we're going to have to wait and see how that actually functions. So you may recall, near the start of this video, I did say that Navi was created specifically for the PlayStation 5. So one of the problems of doing that, according to this source and these allegations, is that RX Vega, which by the way, a lot of blame had been placed on the shoulders of Raja Koduri, and that could have been one of the reasons that he decided to leave AMD, assuming this stuff is accurate, by the way. Because according to Raja Koduri, the decision to do this, to divert about 2/3 of the engineers to creating Navi, was at the hands of Lisa Su. What she decided is to focus on AMD's next generation, which would be not only for, of course, the semi-custom business, which of course would be the Xboxes and the Sonys, but also to divert a lot of attention to the next generation of GPUs, which was, of course, well, you know, Navi. What that, of course, impacted Vega, because it meant that they had less engineering time to work on Vega. I don't know about you, but that makes an awful lot of sense to me. It's obvious that there were just issues with Vega at launch, not just the power consumption, but just some of the features that just weren't as, what's the best way of describing it? Optimized, as efficient. It just felt like, it's not necessarily it's a broken product. I know sometimes I come across as very negative towards Vega. I don't want that to be the case. But Vega was clearly a product that needed more time in the tank. And here's my thing. If Vega had just been a little bit more refined, I honestly feel it wouldn't necessarily have beaten Pascal, because beaten is a very difficult term, because of course it depends on what pricing you're competing on, what games you're competing on, level of optimization. Like for example, Vega could have ended up being more expensive, and Nvidia could have just released the 1080s and whatever at cheaper prices. So are you really beating them? Price, yes. Performance, well, sorry, price, I guess Pascal would win if they cut down the price, but Vega may have been faster. But as it was, of course, right now the 1080s are just a better value overall than AMD. But it's clear that if you look at the fact that if you actually undervolt Vega and you increase the clock speed of the HBM, Vega actually does better. And once again, it appears to me, according to these allegations anyway, if you take them at face value, that the issue was that AMD just did not have, or rather Raja Koduri, to be specific, in RTG, just did not have enough resources available to actually push RX Vega to the limelight, to the position it had supposed to have been in. And you can actually see, according to these allegations, that Radeon Frontier Edition had actually been pushed out basically just to keep the release date of Vega within the time frame that AMD had promised. Now, according to these sources, there is another thing as well, and that is that Navi, from what we're hearing, is essentially ready. They are referring to it as not as in a design stage. They're referring to it as like it's done, it's pretty much ready. So you can take this as AMD could release Navi pretty quickly to gamers, as in, you know, you and I as desktop gamers, but they may, simply because it was being designed for Sony, be holding it back as part of Sony's commitment. Obviously, I don't have the documentation of the contract between Sony and AMD. For all I know, and this is pure speculation, AMD cannot give Navi to Microsoft. It's pure speculation. It could also be that the new architecture, the one we don't know anything about, has been paid for by Microsoft. It's possible that it hasn't. It's possible that the new Xbox is going to use Vega. It's possible it could use a new architecture. It's possible that it could use Navi, but a different variant of Navi. It's possible that Sony have said, yeah, you can have Navi, but we also want the PR of saying that the new PlayStation launches with the latest desktop GPU from AMD. Therefore, we're going to make you wait and sit on this for a while. So you go ahead and release Vega 7nm, which is also possible. It's a lot of speculation. It's a lot of bloody speculation, isn't it? There's a lot of discussion of the PlayStation 5 and what it's going to look like in performance. And I think it's outside the remit of this video simply because it's already getting kind of long. But to me anyway, I'm going to give you a very brief synopsis. I don't think the PlayStation 5 is possibly going to be released as late as the Xbox next generation. By the way, there's going to be a separate video with the Xbox stuff today as well, because there's a lot of leaks concerning the new Xbox, but I wanted to separate the videos because this one's already getting really messy, so to add in a different company as well would be like, oh lord. So do go ahead and check that out if you want. With Sony and the PlayStation 5, I think that it's going to be considerably more powerful than the Xbox One X, but that's bloody obvious. In terms of CPU performance, AMD and Sony are in a really strange position because they could have one Zen CCX or one CCX, which is 4 cores, 8 threads, and it's still the same number of threads as the PlayStation 4, but the actual throughput would be considerably higher. For those who don't know, the base model PS4 operates at 1.6 GHz for the CPU. That's 8 CPU cores. But the PlayStation 4 Pro is 2100 MHz, but then is easily capable of 3 to 4 GHz. Obviously, it does depend upon the configuration and how much power you're willing to put into the bloody thing. But even if Sony were somewhat, okay, well, we're going to be a bit cautious, they could certainly put 3 GHz into the darn thing, or 3.2 GHz into the darn thing, and it wouldn't be like they had 1000 MHz over the PS4 Pro, because there's also the IPC gains of Zen. So they could go with 4 cores, SMT, which would mean 8 threads, or they could have some random number. They could have, let's say, 6 cores, which would mean they would have a lot of additional, they would have a good amount of capacity there if one of the cores was broken. Because don't forget, one of the issues with any console, you want to make sure that you do have that buffer for manufacturing defects. And Sony, of course, have done that in the PlayStation 3. They've done that with the PlayStation 4 even. There's been additional compute units in the PS4's GPU, and Microsoft have done it for the Xbox One and Xbox One X as well. So doing that for the CPU would make an awful lot of sense. They could manufacture it with 8 physical cores, but only 6 or 7 of them are actually active. But then, of course, you've got SMT. So do you really need 14 or 18 threads or even 12 threads for a next generation console? Maybe, I don't know. It depends, of course, on what the next generation of games are going to look like. As for GPU performance, I imagine it's going to be quite monstrous. Moving away from the gaming side, from consoles, and switching to the PC gear, what does that mean? Well, AMD are going to be in a really weird position. The semi-custom business, the margins are small, but it's consistent, because obviously if you've got a PlayStation 5 order, you know that Sony are going to want PlayStation 5 for the next X number of years. If you're creating a GPU for gamers, you can't sell RX Navi for 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years. Even though the margins are higher at the initial launch, it quickly runs out. And it's good for shareholders, and I suspect a lot of this from AMD is from shareholders. In fact, that articles have said the same thing. What shareholders like is consistent revenue. It's going to be curious to me, because if that means AMD do not have a high-end component for several more months or possibly even a couple of years, that basically means that gamers are left at the hands of Nvidia. So if you want a high-end GPU, assuming these rumors are accurate, I'm essentially telling you, well actually no, the logic is telling you, forget what I'm saying, the logic is telling you that whatever Nvidia launch at the high end, that's the high end, bub. That's basically what you're going to be left with. With that said, that's not necessarily bad. If Vega launches, if Navi launches 7nm at about the performance of the Vega 64, for the sake of argument, and it's pretty cheap, and it runs fairly cool, and it's at a good price, performance ratio, compared to the competitors, I'm okay with that. And we don't need necessarily high bleeding edge cards, because how many people really buy 1080s? Okay, quite a few people are going to buy like 1070s. Quite a number of people are buying the 1060s. But the 1080s starting to get quite pricey. When you're starting to get to like the TIs or the TIs or whatever you want to call it, or the Titans, a lot of people just can't justify that, and that's fine. What I'm saying is that I'm happy for AMD to hit that mid-range, to bring down the price and be competitive in that area, and to make sure that Nvidia at that price point stay honest. The rumors were that Nvidia were going to price the 1060 at more expensive than what they had, but the existence of the RX 480s and then the 580s essentially pulled them back and said, you might not want to do that. And I was okay with that. Really, over the next couple of months, it's going to be very curious to me what the specifications of all of this are. But, yeah, this has been more of a discussion, I guess, going through things and kind of getting us all onto the same page, and I want to know your thoughts on it. So, let me know. Answer them. Give me your thoughts down below. With all of that said, yeah, normal stuff. Like, share, comment, subscribe. That would be good if you rang the bell icon as well. But, yeah, take care of yourselves. Bye for now.